So good afternoon, everyone. This is a new session for me, so I'm excited about this one. Indigenous astronomy in your classroom. I've been doing some research on this, and largely a lot of what I'm going to present today particularly is due to the wonderful works of Wilfred Buck. He is Cree from Manitoba, and he travels around the country actually doing planetarium type shows. He's got two different domes that he can set up. He can take them inside of schools or he can do them outside, depending on the weather. And he teaches particularly about Cree astronomy. So because he's done so much work in that area, I'm really going to probably focus more on that. I've tried to include some Blackfoot stuff, and there are some Dene links as well. But I have more information on that simply because he's done so much wonderful work. So I'll be showing you that. Today's presentation is brought to you by Alberta Regional Professional Development Consortia, which I belong to the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium from that. And it is funded by Alberta Learn Alberta. Do a land acknowledgement first. So Tanse, I live on Treaty 7 land, the ancestral home of the Blackfoot people. I'm here in Calgary. Also Dene and Métis Nation number 3, which I belong to, people here, and all contributed to the shaping of Alberta and Canada. I thank the Blackfoot particularly for letting me live on their land and sharing it with me. And for those of you who come to my presentations, because I know a few people that come to most of them, bear with me. I have to introduce myself to everyone who hasn't been to my sessions before. My name is Tammy Johnson. For ARPDC, we are called Designers of Professional Learning, and which is a really great all-encompassing term because aside from these online presentations that we do, which I think, since COVID, they increased because now it's much easier for teachers to receive professional development this way. I also do, workshops and presentations in person. I did have somebody on a survey ask the other day about doing that, and they didn't leave their name. If anybody wants any information on that, you can just email me. As well as we do work on curriculum areas too. So you could see some of that work as well. For instance, Orange Shirt Day, I helped with the NRLC in doing their presentations that week. I am Red River Métis, which is what Louis Riel called us, from what is historically known as the Red River Settlement. So it's the name of the area given after Canadian government of Upper and Lower Canada took over the prairies, and the province of Manitoba was formed. And for those who are Métis or Indigenous period, there's two things we ask each other when we meet. Where are you from? And who are your people? Because that's how we identify each other. And so for the Métis families, my mom is a Mowat. There's also McDonald's and the Mackays and Baudrys, and particularly the Baudrys or Métis, French Métis voyageur family from Alberta. And they're a pretty prolific family. There's lots of them. So they're all across the prairies. If you've heard the name before, probably, and Mackays as well, you would have heard Fort Mackay as part of the same group of people. That is a picture of my great-grandpa there, the gentleman sitting on the bench by the rocks. It's James Mowat, and in Fort Saskatchewan, there's a school named after him, if you've been there or worked there. James Mowat Elementary, and Mowat Park is right beside, and then in Edmonton, there's a street named after him, James Mowat Trail, spelled with 2 T's, no matter, like I always say. They had a Scottish accent when my first relative came, Edward Mowat, and he was from Orkney, and a D sounds like a T in the Scottish accent. So the English changed it, which is fine because it's all the same group of people anyways. The picture to the right is a picture of his surviving children. My grandpa is the middle boy, Rosser, and his brothers Oliver and Stanley, and my great aunt Tassie that's right beside them. I think that picture is probably around 1916 because I think my grandpa was about 6 years old, and the picture of my great grandpa is late 1800s. So it's really nice to have those pictures from my family history. I did, as you can see, my family is from Selkirk, Manitoba, which is just north of Winnipeg, but I did go to school in Winnipeg. And I started teaching the same school division, Seven Oaks School Division, that I graduated from. And I did that in 1988. I was, at that time, the only Indigenous teacher in the school, which seems odd because of the high concentration and population of Indigenous peoples in Winnipeg. However, that was a long time ago and there weren't a lot of Indigenous teachers. So I think that's improved quite a bit. I think that the education programs, particularly across the prairies, have tried to encourage Indigenous students to pursue teaching careers. so that we can help people in our own populations as well. And I've been in Calgary for almost 30 years, but I still call the Red River my home. I worked a lot in special education with Indigenous students, like I said. I worked on a particular project a couple of years ago with Kataskanil Tribal Council and Ignite Online Learning. I took their online, or rather their outreach program for grades 7 to 9. And they base all their curriculum around the seasons. So I took it and I indigenized it for their particular cultures. There's 5 groups of people, nations that formed this one particular tribal council for education. And under the permission from Learn Alberta, have created their own curricular system based on the needs that are in the curriculum, but as well as for Indigenous peoples. And so based around the seasons with land-based learning, the Cree language, and obviously removing a lot of those barriers that are there. And I had a lot of help with consultation with their specialists as well. I learned a lot from them. I was encouraged to continue the work. Their elders were very happy with the exercises I came up with for the kids, because I tried to also, along with seasons and, obviously their stuff that was going on land-based learning, I also tried to make sure that 7, 8, and 9 could work together in most cases during those seasons to learn the different things that were in the curriculum as well. So it was it was a daunting task, but I really loved it. And then I also realized while doing that, how it would be a very daunting task for especially those who are non-Indigenous. I could rely on the things I learned growing up, even though I wasn't specifically told this is a Métis thing to do or an Indigenous thing to do. It's just I was raised by my grandparents primarily. And my grandpa was Métis, my grandmother was English, Swedish, but she was very much a naturalist, and her and my grandpa were very much in the same mind at that time, especially living off, the land as much as they could. And we were outside a lot as children, and didn't matter the weather. And so that's how I grew up, right? But I realized it would be hard for non-Indigenous teachers particularly, and some Indigenous teachers who didn't have any of that background, because many haven't. They've lived in suburbs and we're all reclaiming our cultures, to do that. So that's where I've set out to help you guys, hopefully. So that's kind of my goal. Before I get going, I want to show you the AirPDC resources. It is something we do each session just to make sure that you guys know where to look for things, but these are already created by Alberta educators, so it's really good to know that they're here already. There are quite a few First Nations, Métis, and Inuit resources created already. The one most people know about is Empowering the Spirit. This is a very popular site across the country, actually. Even when I go and look on even post-secondary sites, or I would say museum sites, even other school divisions across the country, when I'm researching different things, I often come across them using Empowering the Spirit. So it's quite a powerful site that they definitely recommend to people. It's very well organized. I draw your attention particularly to the Orange Shirt Day and Beyond. It has some of my favorite things in there under teaching tools. There's posters you can print out for your classroom for things like sharing circles protocols, Orange Shirt Day posters, and different things like that. So those are some really cool things. But I encourage you to take a peek at that if you've never actually taken a look at it. And then on the AirPDC website for professional development resources alone, you can go find resources by focus. And if I go to focus, you can just go down to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. And it comes up with all of the things there. So it propagates all those things. And you probably notice Weaving Ways is one you probably have in your, in a paper copy, probably still in your schools. Education is Our Buffalo. I know that one's been around for a very long time, but it's still really good and very relevant. I know that they're updating things as they go, as well as the French teachers that are in AirPDC are working very hard to try and get all the resources available en français as well. So if that's something that you're looking for, you can search by audience, you can search by level, or you can search by type. So yeah, I just encourage you to look there first if you're looking for a resource and you haven't had trouble finding something, take a peek there. So I'm going to get right into the astronomy. I'm getting pretty good. I did that in 10 minutes. Proud of myself. So I want to first start off by, I know there's always the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? With anything to do with Indigenous issues in Canada, but I think we need to address them, first of all. I try my best to never focus on the negative in anything entirely, because I don't think it solves the issues of the day, or dwelling on everything doesn't help people heal from it either. However, we do need to recognize these particular things and the influence, so that you understand also the historical context in which, you'll find all these things that exist about Indigenous astronomy, but you probably didn't know. And I'm going to tell you why you didn't know. So you probably already know that, like the first part here, this is from an article in an interview with Wilfred Buck as well. So just so you know that this is not my words. This is stuff I took from the article, and there's a link there to the article that you can see. So it's now Achakasuk, which is the Cree stars, right? So when Europeans first made contact with the fully functioning established belief systems of Indigenous understandings, which were, as you know, if you've been learning anything about Indigenous ways of knowing, very radically different from European understandings, the settlers determined that, and interesting that they used alien understandings in this terminology when it's about astronomy, that had to be subdued and discredited because they threatened their Christian ideology and base of power. And so that was very true. When you have a belief system of your own and you encounter something that is different, particularly then, people, didn't have all the information. People were very superstitious, all the different things, right? So they didn't have room to have other belief systems available. And they also saw Indigenous peoples as, the term would be, savages. The English also saw, and I always say, interestingly enough, my Scottish ancestors, which, as you could see from the names, they were mostly Scottish, from Orkney and the Highlands, also as savages. So my grandpa's people, when they came to Canada, I jokingly say I should get t-shirts made for those of us who are Scottish Métis, because we could be savages, and we could be cubed, right? We got it there, we got it here. So, there's that, because whenever you don't agree with something somebody else does is different than you, then it's a savage behavior, right? So the Indigenous worldview that was here was subjugated. So it was pushed down, and it was obviously the advent of residential schools and things like that, the cutting of the hair, taking away the language, removing people from their land, epistemicide, all those things. The genocidal practices of those behaviors started to eliminate the belief systems of the Indigenous peoples that were here. And so particularly anything to do with the stars and understanding of the planets and anything that was around, that Indigenous people had, was completely wiped out, pretty much, of being able to talk about it. And so it's really important to understand, though, that for Indigenous peoples, if you think about this, you're outside all the time, land-based learning, right? And that's where you were. Your language is all about the land and the sky. Everything is about the sky too. And so, like, for instance, in the Cree language, when you put together words and you string them together, they're all land words to describe common things. And so you're looking at the sky, you're looking at the ground, and those are the things you have. And this is what you're looking at. And so, unfortunately, as colonized people, Indigenous people also forgot those things, right? So these are a lot of teachings that we're coming back to learning. And Wilfred Buck is a great person to be teaching this. He's amazing, because he's a very educated, well-rounded person, and very willing to take this information and share it with people. So, there's also a belief, and I was taught this as well when I was growing up, that Indigenous languages were inferior to English, and Indigenous behavior in terms of living was inferior to British ways of doing things. That was all inherent in what I grew up with. And so all of us were taught this. And First Nations people, definitely hammered away at them about this was bad. And so it's really wonderful, I think beautiful, now that we can start to accept these things and practice them as we used to do, and talk about them, right? And that you guys can learn about them as well. So it's really awesome if you can learn some of this stuff and teach the children. And, it's a beautiful thing that we can start to come back to this. It's taken a while, but I think it's a really positive thing. So I'm going to start off something interesting. You may know this. I don't know. It depends where you've been and what you know. The Cree people themselves consider themselves the star people. So they come from the stars, and we're always told we come from the stars. And I've always thought that this is a beautiful thing because, I know my grandpa used to say that, everything that's inside of us is inside of the earth, it's inside of the trees, it's inside of the animals. Everybody's related because we do all come from the stars. All of the things that belong in the stars, whatever happened during, the great big bang and all the things that are around, all of the same minerals. Think about the vitamins and minerals you take. If you take a daily vitamin, and I take a whole lot of other ones because I suffer from migraines, so I take a whole lot of stuff, magnesium and co-10 enzymes, like a whole list of things. But these are all things that exist in the entire universe, within the stars and within the earth and everywhere, right? So when we say also that we're from the stars, if you think of it that way, we are really, at the end of the day. They literally mean, though, that word, just the words for stars in Cree is Achikasuk. Achikasuk. I don't think I'm saying it with the right intonation. My Cree teacher elders would probably not be happy with my pronunciation, but it's, anyways, you get kind of the idea. But the root of that is Achuk, and that means spirit. And so the stars, when you look up in the sky, they were spirits and living in the heavens. And so we would go back to there. And so our ancestors would live in the stars, and they would look down on us and be there to help us. If you think about the Northern Lights for the Inuits, right? They also believed that that was their ancestors. Those were the people. You could hear them singing, right? You could hear the sound of the Northern Lights. And so there's a lot of stuff that comes with that in terms of, understanding where astronomy fits in with Indigenous peoples. And so these things have been going on for thousands and thousands of years, right? We know that there's been Indigenous peoples on this land that have been like that they found archaeologically. The last one, I think, from the National Geographic was like 5,000 or 5,500 years ago. The medicine wheel in Montana, I believe it's in Wyoming. The biggest one's in Wyoming. And they can't even date that. They think it may be millions of years old. And so that's interesting, right? So there are First Nations people on Turtle Island that believe that they have always been here. Like when people say, oh, you came from, like a strait, or you came across on a boat from somewhere else, and they will say, no, we've always been here. And so, it kind of makes you wonder, right? Maybe, I don't know, right? I wasn't there. But there's this knowledge that they passed down to the Cree, the Lakota, and the Ojibwe people close to where we are, right? In particular, and that's where so Wilfred Buck himself has really studied in those peoples, because he is from Manitoba, and that's the people that are around him in particular. Excuse me, I'm sorry, allergies. So he started to gather these stories from these nations, and he found a lot of similarities about how Indigenous people saw the sky and the connection to it. And so in order to understand Indigenous astronomy, you need to understand those stories. You need to understand that, again, like I said, the language is tied to the land and the sky, and also the stories. The storytelling is what creates these constellations, just like the Romans and the Greeks had. And so I'm going to show you some of those stories too, because there's some really great websites around Alberta that have collected some of these stories in English. So if you look at the last quote, and this is Buck says, he says, we originate from the stars. We are star people. The Genesis mythologies say this is where we come from. We come from those stars. We're related to those stars. Once we finish what we come to do here, we go back to those stars. And if you've ever heard any of the kind of theories where people talk about the Pleiades systems, or I can't remember, there's a couple other ones, but they talk about, the star people. And it's interesting now, especially when you look at the United States, and I know there was just a UFO sighting. Was it? I can't remember. I think it was in Canada, maybe it was. No, it was in Nevada. That's where it was, right? And they have cam footage from a police officer of this thing coming from the sky and kind of wobbling, and it looks kind of like a UFO. I don't know what it was. And then you have these people that said that this thing crashed on their land, and then they saw these creatures that were like 10 feet tall, and they started talking to them. And this is just a couple weeks ago. And so I don't know. I can't tell you. But there is a movie that has been available, and I think it may still be available. I'm not quite sure at this point, but it should be online at least, with the TELUS Spark in Edmonton. And so this is Legends of the Northern Sky. And I'm not going to play the whole, this is just like their trailer. And then you get some information here from Wilfred Buck as well, who is the person who helped develop this movie.
To many of us, when we think of constellations, we think of Orion's Belt and the Big Dipper. But a new animated dome show just premiered at Edmonton's Science Centre tells the story of astronomy from an Indigenous perspective. Travis McEwen has the details.
The sky is on display at the Ziedler Dome, closer than normal. Legends of the Northern Sky is an animated story of animals who stand up to a destructive bear. Those animals are also symbols of constellations in some Indigenous cultures.
I like the animals, that they had pretty designs and cool designs. And the Big Dipper, I thought it was just the Big Dipper, but the bear appeared on it. And I'm like, oh, that was cool.
Every culture on the face of this earth have the capacity for intellectual thought.
Wilfred Buck is an Indigenous astronomer from Manitoba. He's researched the stories behind the constellations in Indigenous cultures across Canada for a decade and a half. The stories and names are slightly different based on the mythology of different Indigenous communities.
Through the educational system, one would get the impression that the only people that went outside and looked at the sky at night was Romans and Greeks. But every culture on the face of the earth went outside and looked at the sky and had their own connections.
The film is a part of the Tell Us World of Science's efforts to tell local stories related to science.
It's not a story of the sky. It's a story about how the sky and the stars are seen and learned from by people who lived here. We are extremely committed to Indigenous education and improving the quality of opportunities for working with First Nation schools and communities.
Legends of the Northern Sky will play daily at the Ziedler Dome for the next 4 months.
Yeah.
To many of us, when we think of...
Flip through that, it tries to play again when I do that. Okay. There's an article as well that I found that goes over and explains a little bit more, obviously, because that's just a bit of a snippet of the information. And I know it's been a few years. I imagine that, and I'm going to try to find out exactly if there is a place that we can actually rent it online. I would think that there would be. What's interesting was I found in this one particularly was that it's a local production that has students from Ermineskin Elementary School in Maskwacis in it. So that's really cool as well. And of course, then you have Wilfred Buck does the storytelling, and he's amazing. As you can see, he's a really cool guy. And he does, like I said, sessions across the country, and somebody you can book for your schools. So if you just look up Wilfred Buck, I know he books well in advance, but I have him on Facebook, and he's always like, I'm in Ontario, I'm in New Brunswick, back in Manitoba, I'm in Alberta, I'm in Saskatchewan. It's like he's all over the place. So, he's well received, and yeah, so it's really interesting. So I think to understand as well that understanding the stars in the sky for Indigenous peoples as well, it's a spiritual thing as well. So there isn't anything that is involved in traditional Indigenous cultures without it being spiritual. There's just no way to separate it, right? So as he goes on in this article, and he says, he did extensive research and realized that a lot of stuff that we have, like for instance, ceremonial songs and things like that, and you may not know about these, but it's like, for instance, in a sweat lodge, there's certain amount of songs or types of songs that are sang that are just for ceremony. And each of the 4 sessions that you go, or the rounds we call them that you go through, there's songs that are sang, and sometimes they have to do with the sky, right? And because we have Mother Earth, and we have grandfather Moon, and like grandmother Moon rather, and grandfather Sun, and so there's these different things that you have that we talk about, and they're involved in it, right? And they have to do with everything in terms of even just celebrations and talking about life in general, right? So really interesting, right? So again, Buck even mentions like the Pleiades or something that Indigenous peoples have looked at, because it's a dense group of stars that you can see, right? When there's a meteor shower, it's usually the Pleiades that we're looking at, because it's the closest to us, I believe, and then you can see a lot of the meteors flying at certain particular times of the year. And so, yeah, and now I come from Manitoba, and so we have a planetarium there that is just amazing. I always loved it as a kid. And so he's mapped that kind of that idea. So he's got like this, you know, traveling planetarium, which is just amazing. And as a kid, was my favorite thing, to go to the planetarium, I have to say. I actually wanted to be an astronomer when I was a little girl, but I was told plenty of times by people that I was a little girl and I should be either a teacher or a nurse. So, but that's okay. I wanted to be a teacher. I did want to show you one of the legends. Just it's really short video, just to kind of give you an idea about how you can tie storytelling with astronomy into your classrooms if you want to use it at any level.
So the story we're going to relate to you today is called Atima Chagasak, the dog stars. And it refers to the group of stars that's known as Ursa Minor, or the Little Dipper in the sky, with the anchor star Polaris. For the Cree people, Daniel, we look at that group of stars and we call it Atima Chagasak, the dog stars. And the story tells us how human beings acquired dogs. Because at one point, human beings didn't have dogs. So they didn't have no early warning systems in their camps at night. Nothing to bark and make noise and tell them that something was coming. So what they do is they assign night watchmen to watch over the camps at night. So these was various young men that would stay up all night and would look after the camp, make sure nothing got in or nobody got in. But of course, being human beings, these young men, at times they got hungry in the middle of the night and they decided they had to go eat. So they go eat and they leave their post. And as they left their post, then animals would get into camp, invaders would get into camp. Or maybe they'd eat too much and they get upset stomach and they have to run to the washroom. And again, they'd leave the camp open. Or maybe in the middle of the night, they'd hear a psst, psst, and their honeys would come looking for them. And then they totally forget what they're doing. And then they'd, again, forget their jobs. And so this went on for years and years and years. The camps were invaded and destruction happened, chaos happened, even death happened. And after occurring for years and years, one of our brothers, Nishdesh Mayagan, our older brother, the wolf, he watched us and he felt sorry for us. He said, get the magi in the. Those human beings are pitiful. I'm going to send 2 puppies to live with them. So Mayagan, he sent 2 puppies to live with us. So 2 little wolf puppies went to live with the human beings. But Mayagan had 2 younger brothers. And one of his younger brothers was Mistataganese, the coyote. And Mistataganese thought, my Nistesh is sending puppies. My older brother is sending puppies, so I'm going to send puppies. And so Mistataganese, the coyote, he sent 2 puppies also. And not to be outdone, the youngest brother, Magasu the fox, he said, okay, my brothers are sending puppies, I'm sending puppies. So the way it turned out, 2 sets of 3, 6 dogs went to live with 6 puppies went to live with the human beings. And these 6 sets, there was 4 sets of 6. They went to live in the 4 directions of the world with all the humans beings throughout the world. And from those sets of dogs in each of those directions, we get all the dogs of the world. And the interbreeding of the species, that's how we acquired the dogs and the taming of those brothers and sisters, those relatives of ours. And science says that this is actually how we did get dogs, with the interbreeding of species and the taming of the species. So that's how dogs were acquired throughout the world. And it was a study done in northern Russia, in Siberia, back in 1920 and 1930, where a group of biologists went around to all the sable farms in Russia, in Siberia, and they selected 8 pairs of the most tame sable. Sable are the black foxes. And they separated those 8 timid pairs of timid black foxes away from everything else and kept them together with themselves. So there was 16 sables, the most timid, the most friendly, the most gentle. And they set them and they reared them and they grew by themselves. And over a period of 3 generations, those sables, they changed. They physically changed. Their black fur. Some of it was spotted. Some of it got short. They grew big. They grew small. They altered themselves, and that's how they produced dogs. It was said, and so this was an experiment to just to prove the interbreeding of the species. So there's I guess a little scientific misnomer there to I guess to say, yeah, this is how it was done. This is, and our people understood about the interbreeding of species. That was Atimachagasak, the dog stars. Actually.
Yeah, so I think, sorry, I'm just gonna go to the next screen. So it is interesting, right? So a lot of the things that are told in stories, I often say this to people because I always say avoid, and I know a lot of the stuff, even online for this, as legends and things like that. And I understand, you know, the dog's coming from the stars, maybe it doesn't make sense, but you know, but like he said, it does explain dog breeding. It does understand how they were tamed. You know, you take the most gentle of those that are, you know, have that passive personality, but still have the ability of the wolf to protect you. And then you breed them for the characteristics that you want. And those are the ones that you keep. So there's a lot of scientific things that are explained in Indigenous stories. So storytelling has many different purposes, right? It has a purpose of explaining morality, explaining legends, and but also family histories and explaining scientific things. So there's no word in Cree that's called science. There's no word that's called math, right? Like it's there. These are just things that you learn. This is part of life, right? So I think it's kind of cool that you can take some of these ideas even about astronomy and you can stretch it out to explain some of these things as well. This is a really cool website. North American Star Lore of the Cree. So this is a lady that has collected all this information and just some really cool stuff. She's collected it from Canada and across the States. And as you can see, she mentions Wilfred Buck. He's everywhere when it comes to this stuff. So if you're looking up anything and you find his name, it's good stuff, right? There's a group called Native Skywatchers, and I believe I have a link to that later as well, that are professional astronomers, artists, language and cultural experts, educators, community members, and Native American elders from the States. And they have this, they collect all this information that's really awesome. So they're a really great place to look. And so this is in 2016, the group published a Cree star map. So this is the Cree star map. And I think this is so cool. I'd like to get this as a poster. What's really cool too is because then it gives you the seasons and it tells you the seasons in Cree, right? So you've got spring, Sigwan, Nipin for summer, Taguakin for fall, and Pipon. Winter is Pipon. People, I think I'm gonna get that one wrong. I'm just learning some of the pronunciations, but then you've got your directions as well, right? But it's really cool. So you've got, you know, the different constellations that are on there, and you've got the minor ones throughout as well. So it's really cool. So in the chat says, right? Yeah, exactly. Darcy's, yeah, it'd be beautiful as a poster for sure. I would love it as a poster. I think it'd be so cool. So I'm hoping maybe I can find one. So then there's a whole list of on here, just some background information as well for you. So if you wanted to use this as well. So you've got Mista Musqua, right? Or Mushqua, depending on where you are speaking Cree, which is where the Big Dipper is, as you saw in that little clip about that movie in Edmonton. And so you can see the bear came down and it was destroying everything. So you had to get all there's this whole story, right, about the constellations. You had to get all these other animals together to help. Right. And so you've got this 7 birds and yeah, and just the colors on some of these, right, that they created on the sky map based on some of the drawings that they found on, you know, just like different teepees and things like that. And the sweat lodge itself is interesting because apparently the shape, because I know when I go to sweat lodge, it's a shape of a dome, right? And it's dug down, so you go into it. But it is in that shape of a dome, much like a planetarium, right? So it's that idea of being connected to the outer world as well. So you're not only connected to Mother Earth on the grounds that you're sitting on, but you're connected to the sky at the same time, even though it's completely black inside, other than the rocks inside the grandfathers and grandmothers that are burning in the middle of the sweat lodge. So really, if you see any kind of sparkles, because they put medicines on the rocks, on the stones, and you just see sparks every once in a while. It's almost like stars. So it's actually really cool. So I never thought about it before until, well, I mean, they've said things like that in the sweat lodge, but I never really thought about it until I started really researching this. And I was like, that's so cool. And then you've got within Orion, there's, you've got, you got the giant, right? So Mr. This is Mr. Powell, I think Mr. Powell. And so I am in my third session of Cree, but I'm still not completely proficient in all of this. And some of these are different because they're from Manitoba. The pronunciation is very different because it's kind of it's a Y dialect as well, but it's kind of a mix with Swampy as well in terms of some of the pronunciation. You can probably blame that on some of the Métis people, because I know when my family came from northern Manitoba to the Red River settlement, they spoke Swampy Cree. And then they had to learn Plains, but some of the words got kind of mixed up with the pronunciations as well. So there's that. So yeah, as we talk about like the heated rocks in the sweat lodge they've got here, right? Those are representative Pleiades, which I didn't realize, which is really cool too. So now I know something I can tell them if they don't know, or next time I go on Sunday. And yeah, so all these stars here, there's the dog stars that you learned about. And then there's Kuwaitan, which is Polaris, which is really cool as well. So Kuwaitan, if you've ever been to Manitoba in particular, in Winnipeg, there's a whole street area named Kuwaitan, and there's different areas of Manitoba named Kuwaitan as well too. So it's really cool. And then they've got the spring constellations here for you. I'm not going to go through everything. You guys can check out the link when you get it. Yeah. So I just thought that was a really cool website that the ladies put together. I've got lots of stuff to show you. So I did want to show you, like I said, I tried to find some things on Blackfoot astronomy because there isn't tons out there. There's more stuff in the States, but it's based on American, I don't even know how to explain it. It just wasn't completely relevant when I looked at it. So you might find some of those resources, but they're not amazing. Yeah, so it's actually from Montana. There's a lot of stuff, and they call it the Blackfeet Astronomy, Montana Skies. Now, there are some videos on here, and I just wanted to show you that there are some things available if you're in the south of Alberta, so that you could look at some of these things if you wanted to. Excuse me. So they do have some Blackfoot star stories here. In the States, they do call themselves the Blackfeet, so it's a little bit different there. But I just wanted you to know that I tried to find some things that were good. And then Calling Down the Spirits in the Sky, there is a site that has some, it's basically more of a pedagogy that you could read yourself, but it is all online as far as I could tell. And it's talking about the intersections of religion and astronomy, which I'm not really excited about that title necessarily, but it does have a lot of information about the Blackfoot belief systems compared to Western beliefs, and then they relay it back to a lot of the observations of the night sky. So I just thought if that was something you were interested in to take a peek at, and I did put some other things in the other resources as well too, which I'm going to start to go through. I do want to address the moon and its cycle. So you cannot separate Indigenous peoples across the planet, right, without understanding the moon cycles, and that's obviously part of astronomy. How is the earth, the moon going around the earth and its interaction with the light from the sun. And, like we just had a solar eclipse a couple weeks ago, and we're having a lunar eclipse, which we won't be able to see, unfortunately, on this side of the planet, but it is still occurring and we can watch it online. YouTube is awesome that way, to be able to watch a lot of these things happening. But it's really important to understand how the 13 moon cycles really are part of, like I said, all Indigenous cultures. And this happens to be a Government of Canada website. And guess what? Wilfred Buck's name is there again. He's everywhere. And he's such a humble person. So it's amazing that he's there. But I like this website because it actually has the calendar cycle. So this is actually something we're learning. For my Cree class, we're actually just having to, not having to, but we're learning the names of the different moons, right, for the months, because they correlate with the months now. So obviously Western culture tries to take things and put it into a box that it wants to create, especially around a work week and things like that. Whereas Indigenous cultures try to live within nature and within the system. And so this just explains the moons and how they, I'll just play through it for you. Or if it will play, no, maybe not. So anyways, it gives you the different constellations as well that are there, the different moons and the names of them, and what they're called, and gives you an idea of why they're called that for the different types of things that are happening during the year. So there's that to give you that information for your students. And then the other one is Cree literacy website. I don't know if anybody knows this website, but it's really good. It's, especially for me when I'm learning Cree, there's a lot of really good stuff on here. But again, she has the moon cycles on here. But what's really cool too is down at the bottom, like there's an explanation of here if you wanted to listen to it in Cree. And this is actually like a, I'm not sure if it's a song or if it's a poem somebody wrote. I think it's probably a song, most likely, but it's a moon song. It's quite pisim, and yeah, so you could listen to that if you want. And then they go through all the different words in English, and then give you the term in Cree with the standard spelling, which is the English spelling, and then you get the syllabics, and then the literal translation. And what's really cool, like if you look at this, like the Cree term, and I'm not going to pronounce all of this. I know how to say most of it, but I don't want to stumble through the whole thing for moon phases. The literal translation is the cycle of the moon's changing appearance. So when you start to look at these things, I think you can explain to children how these words are so related to the land and to the sky where people were living, and really push home that idea that, you know, the influence of what was around people and how they lived was really how they described things. And this is how it's still explained, right? Like for instance, new moon, it hangs new, right? That it's hanging up in the sky and it's brand new. And you know, and then the waxing gibbous moon, she is almost round, right? So grandmother moon is, and so again too, to understand too, grandmother moon, why? Because women's cycles go around the moon cycle. And so women, for instance, when you're on your moon time, as we call it, moon time, you're not, you can't go in the sweat lodge, and you can't do a number of things. You can be outside, and it's not a punishment by any means. It's because women are more powerful than men, because we give birth to spirits. We're the only ones who can birth other spirits. And so woman, when she's on her moon time, can actually disrupt the energy that's within a space, because that's so powerful. And so to understand that too, really you need to understand the moon cycle. So it is an interesting thing, right? So Indigenous women go around, and we all call it that, we call it the moon cycle. And I just thought this is a really good resource. I've used this myself before, but especially if you're, you know, not even just younger ones, but it's really good to show on the back of a turtle. There are literally 13 sections in the middle for the 13 moons, and then all around the edge of the turtle's shell, there's 28 pieces of those individual sections that represent the moon days of the cycle. So it is really interesting, right? That the turtle itself is a very sacred creation that we see, because it represents the cycles of the moon, and you can link up the days, the cycles in the moon, to the cycles on the back of the turtle. And there's also the names on the moon on there as well. So I just thought it'd be good, you know, you guys to have that, because the moon is so important. I actually have on my back a tattoo of the moon cycles going to my back with the sun, just because it's always been so important to me. My grandpa taught me a lot about that. He was in the Navy, and he was also a fisherman. And so navigation by the stars was something he always taught me. So it was really cool. Anyways, there are some articles on here. I'm not going to go through every single one. Oops, sorry, flip forward. Again, like this one is Wilfred Buck. There is another one too here with Mi'kmaq astronomers, and give you some background information. But I'm going to go through more the ones that are, I think, more curriculum related in particular, like the University of Calgary. So the Rothney Astrophysical Observatory, and I've gone to some of their things outside. It's been really neat. They've done some different things, but this is where there's a whole lot of folklore on here about different stories. So you'll see, and this is like, there's a Blackfoot one here, right? So this one right here is Blackfoot, but there's all kinds of different ones on here too. So if you want, so I want that way too, you had some more that were not just Cree ones, but there's a whole bunch on here if you go through the site. So there's stories on there. And then Stories in the Stars is also one from Ontario. So it really focuses more on, looking at the tribal people that are in Ontario, which are very similar to Manitoba. But yeah, they've got, again, more close-up pictures here. So like you could see, I think that's a really good picture of a visual for kids to see the Big Dipper there and how it's done differently, and then gives you some of that background information about the people, and then gives you some more star stories too. So that I thought was a really good, so you could see that one. Gives you a better map of the skies and how those fit in. And then The Walrus, of course, is a great Canadian magazine. Just some background pedagogical information for teachers I thought was really good. You can't go wrong with using articles from The Walrus for sure. But just giving you some background information. Of course, Wilfred Buck is here again. He's everywhere. It's interesting, like he says here, like astronomy didn't start with Aristotle and end with Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? Not that I'm putting down Neil deGrasse Tyson. I love him. He's an awesome person. I love watching him on any interviews that he does and things like that. But it's really important to understand for sure, like he said, that all Indigenous peoples around the world have always looked to the stars and had their own astronomy and things like that they could see with the naked eye, obviously. And then be mindful of the time too. This one is just called Indigenous Education. This is BC. So this has, again, some information. Of course, it's focused mostly on BC. There's nothing wrong with that. And the FNES ESC website, if you haven't looked at that, they've got some amazing resources. I think this is really cool. They got some stuff on SkyTeller. They do have apparently DVDs and resources that can be used from there, but they have some constellation lesson plans, some stories, a moon lesson plan, a sun lesson plan, that kind of stuff. And as teachers, we're very creative. We can take those resources and modify them for our own area for sure. I found one that was Dene as well as Cree about the night sky. Another one, Sky Stories. And this is again from BC, but it's just a really great resource. It's got so much stuff, and it goes up to grade 9. You like tons of stuff in here anyways. So yeah, again, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. You guys are able to read once you get these. Alberta Teachers Association has already some foundational stories. So I'm going to go down here. They have, again, Wilfred Buck, Lessons from Beyond for grades 4 to 8, and then 9 to 12, and then Lessons from the Earth and Beyond. And then Rupert's Land has some stuff on there as well. So, and then Integrative Science. So just a resource guide for people. I mean, it's a bit old, but I mean, it does have a lot of different resources in here, I'm sure still available, and can kind of put you on to the right path for finding some things. And I'm sure most of these have been updated anyways, if they're books and things like that. And then the last one, Native Sky Watchers, that's what I was telling you about. So this is their association. It is in the States, but they do have some different star maps. So they have Ojibwe, Lakota, and Cree as well. So that star map I was just talking about, they have that as well there. Then they also have the Greek one, and then you can kind of compare them. And obviously that's in Minnesota and North Dakota area. So yeah, those are all there. So I just thought I'd include those for you guys. And I am going to stop recording.